we're going to open that Format Picture menu. So really quick, I'm going to dive right in and share my screen with you. Here we go. So just to give you a very brief example, I have my Do This, Not That slide up, which is going to be the next slide you guys come to when we go back to the presentation in a second. I've selected my image, and up here on the screen you see you've got your usual menus. You've got your picture tools. You can do it that way, depending on what version of Word you've got. But essentially, you're going to select the image, and then you're going to right-click. It's not always 100%. As you see, I'm having trouble already. I'm going to right-click on that, and then it's going to give you another menu, and you're going to hit Format Picture. Once you do that, it's going to bring you the Format Picture menu, and we scroll all the way down here to Alt Text. It's the very last option on that Format Picture menu. So we're going to click on that, and essentially here you see a title and a description area. Okay? More important than anything else, what I want you to remember is when you're adding alternative text to an image, the most important is the description. Titles don't always display when you convert something to HTML, just FYI. So it's good to enter a title because that gives users an option of whether or not they want to go on to read the description. But just FYI, most important is using that description box, okay? That's really what's going to be the most important thing if your materials or anything gets put up online. Because in the HTML conversion, that title a lot of times gets lost. It doesn't always convey. Okay, and basically here I've entered information about screenshot of how to bring up format dialog box in Microsoft PowerPoint. Blah, blah, blah. You get the picture. It's also under the Size and Properties menu, yes. Thank you for that. So there's a couple of different ways, but essentially you're going to find that menu the easiest way that I do it, and of course, you know, either way is you can click on that. Right-click on your object, and it'll bring up that menu. Do this, not that. We've already talked about this. Make sure that you're putting it. If anything, we know people are pressed for time. A lot of times, if you're like me, you get slides from a presenter. I mentioned this before. We call it last minute Larry, right? We really want to have a great presentation, but a lot of times we get the PowerPoint presentation at the very last minute, and you're trying to run through, and lo and behold, they've put a bunch of images in their PowerPoint, and they have not tagged them, meaning they have not provided alternative text. So if it's anything you do when you run through these is at least make sure that you're providing those descriptions in that description box. Your image arrangement, and I will do a quick demo here again of that. I'm going to share my screen very quickly. We're talking about when you've got a bunch of images on a slide and you're trying to arrange them. There we go. Coming over to this slide. We've got a couple of apples here. We've got the Apple logo. We've got a regular apple over here on the left-hand side. So we've got two images up here. Thinking of your image arrangement is essentially if you've got objects, maybe you're going to group them together or whatever, you're going to select them, and then you're going to come right up here on the top of your menu where you've got Arrange. And you can either choose Bring to Front, Send to Back, Bring Forward, or Send Backward. Really, when you're doing this, it does not have a whole bunch of merit in terms of screen readers. Okay? This is really if you're grouping images together maybe and you want something to show through and something's not, but the order of that is not necessarily going to be helpful to someone with a screen reader. Why do you do this? That's a good question. A lot of times you might have someone who's come up with a real artsy type of presentation, or if you want to group, mainly it's when you're going to group items together that's part of the issue, and I'm going to show you why this can be problematic. Again, just reinforcing. A lot of times if you use Microsoft Publisher and you're laying out something in that manner, sometimes you want to send one image behind another, or for example, you want to have something come in more prominently. It's not going to have that effect with a screen reader. So this is really more for just visual purposes. I want to just stress that, okay? But if you have two objects selected, okay, and you go here, I'm going to bring up the selection pane. Remember, you can click up here in the select, and you're going to open up the selection pane. Let me move this little box down here. Essentially, you're still going to see both pictures. You've got picture 3 and picture 4. Remember, your selection pane reads from the bottom up, so we've got our title slide, okay, and then we've got our first picture and our second picture. That's essentially the order that a screen reader is going to look at that in, unless you mix it up, make changes, however you want. But we're going to talk about when you're selecting items together. Say, for example, you've got a group of logos and you want to put them all together. If you notice, I'm going to click on Arrange. I'm going to shift and select both items. Okay. If you come over here and you want to group items, okay, I've decided to group these items. So I've clicked under Group and I've grouped them. Notice when I'm selecting this, it says Group 3. It's become a different thing slightly. However, just because you've got two items grouped together, the screen reader is still going to go in and read picture 3 and picture 4. That's why we want to draw your attention to this, because if you've got something really, really complex and you're grouping 3 images together or 4 logos so that they all read, be careful when you're doing that. They're going to still read in this order that you've had them. They're not going to read as one object, okay? I want to make sure that's understood, because if you're going to do that, the better thing to do would be you can either group them together, like I have, and then right-click on your image. You've got to really get that outside box there, and then you can click Save as Picture. That is actually better if you're going to do that, because it'll allow you to tag the picture so that you can read all 4 logos, whatever companies or whatever organizations, in the way that you want it read. Now, that's, you don't have to, you can, save as picture, and then you can insert it as a separate, image in there. Or you can leave it by itself if you're not really going to be, if you're not too concerned with whatever order they're reading it in, okay? You can also use whatever software. If you've got someone who's really clever with, Adobe Photoshop or something, whatever you do to create images. Yeah, Storyline groups the images. Even if you make the group not visible to the screen reader, the individual items will be if you don't make them all invisible individually, yes. So again, it's a lot better if you're going to do that, if you're going to group a bunch of images, if you're not really too concerned with the order, then you can certainly group them in there, but I would just recommend, if you want them to read in a certain way, the 100% way to do that is just to save as an image and then insert it that way, so you're not running into too many issues of confusion there. On to slide 16. Adding this alternative text command to your toolbar. I get this question a lot, so I'm going to give you a demo here. Basically, you're just going to add it to your Quick Access Toolbar ribbon. And there's a lot of other commands like the accessibility checker that you can add in there too. So I'm going to share my screen again. Come up here, and you're just going to pretty much right-click on your toolbar, and you're going to go to Customize Quick Access Toolbar. And in here, you've got a lot of options. There's all kinds of cool things that you can add in here. Here, click Quick Access Toolbar. Choose Commands From. Right here, there's a little drop-down menu that says Choose Commands From. Because here you have all your general, and it may not have that alternative text in there. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, depending on what you're using. It's not in there. So we're going to come up here, and you've got this huge list of commands here. The best thing to do is Commands Not in the ribbon. And that's going to bring up some of these more common commands that you might not necessarily use. So right here you've got Accessibility Checker. You can select it and click Add. And it's added that to your toolbar. But right down here you've got Alternative Text, and then you can click Add. Okay? That's basically added that to your toolbar. You can add a whole other bunch of things in there, but essentially that's a real nice option that you can add in so you don't have to go looking for it later. The trick is, if you're like me and you easily forget things, remember, you've got to try to remember what these little icons look like because they are teeny tiny. So even though you've added it in there, it may not pop in and be visible to you right away. Now that I've added those to my toolbar, I'm going to go right here to the far left corner. That's usually where I look for stuff. And if you scroll over it with your mouse, you've got your Check Accessibility, and then you've got your, it says Size and Position, but that is essentially your alternative text dialog box. Okay? And that'll bring it up a lot quicker. So a little bit about alternative text. You just want it to be accurate and equivalent. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, but essentially you're going to present the same content or function as the image. No more than a few words are necessary. Rarely, a short sentence or two may be appropriate. Try not to be redundant. Don't provide information that's already in the surrounding text necessarily if it's something with text that can be legible. But you also want to refrain from using descriptive phrases. Software, for anyone who doesn't know software, the way that it identifies images appropriately for the person who's using it. So you don't have to, when you're putting in your description, you don't have to say image of, or a graphic of, or table of, or chart of, or picture of. These things are intuitive. A lot of software, most of the software has come a very long way, and it's already built in depending on whatever it is the person's using, okay? So you don't have to go in and be redundant that way. Just say what the person is doing or whatever it is that you're trying to convey. And I know this is our big favorite here, tables and charts. Tables and charts can be a really effective tool so that you can convey a lot of information at once. Tables are easier to read than charts. Charts can be read as images. And the same goes for smart art, which I'll get to a little bit later. But essentially, charts will have alternative text as well. And so will your tables. I'll go in and show you how to do that. It's essentially the same thing that we just did earlier, but you want to just remember with charts to keep things simple. Just be effective in your communication. And remember this, to keep in mind that it's not just about screen reader users. It's also any kind of, any type of disability that might have some type of attention deficit related to it, or cognitive, learning disabilities. Remember, too, that, you're using a presentation tool, so if someone's, if you're going to be doing something in a big audience of 100 or more people, try to keep in mind that the more stuff you stick in there that's visual like that, a really intricate, complicated chart might not be the best way to convey the information, whereas you might, stick a couple of text boxes in there with some bulleted text, okay? It just depends. We know, the visual is very stimulating, but at the same time, you might lose some users if you've got something in there that's so complicated and they can't even read it from further away. Also keep in mind that, as you're going through your slides, you might spend between 2 and 3 minutes on a particular slide. So, think about your content in terms of being conscious. How much time are you going to spend conveying one particular slide? Charts and graphs, again, we've talked a little bit more about colors, but again, for people who might have issues such as color blindness, we always recommend trying to refrain using these bright greens, reds, oranges. I've put in the resources here. There's a couple of tools that you can use to go and check your things online. That's where it really comes into play sometimes, is your contrast. If you're going to be doing something that could be put up online later, you really want to use that contrast checker, and we'll go over that again in just a minute. But you want to use that contrast checker just to make sure that your images do stand up against your text, and your shading stands up against one another. If you're using a graph, if you're going to be doing some graphs, try to use Excel as your base for the data, because this is a built-in feature, and it's a lot easier to incorporate from that, but it also makes it easier on you when you have to go back in. If you're like me and you're not good about tagging right away, you've got to go back in and add the alternative text when you finish your developing your PowerPoint. It's a lot easier to click in there because that feature allows you to just grab and copy and paste from your Excel spreadsheet. It's a little bit easier when you're doing that. Captions not necessarily available for graphs and charts in PowerPoint. This really comes into play when you're doing a Word document. So, and it comes up as an automatic option when you select it in a Word document. Just FYI. We'll go over that in the third part where we talk about Word docs a little bit further. Alternative text, again, you're going to do this by right-clicking on the graph or chart. Let's see, here we go. Here's my example of something that's really horrible, and if you're like me, if you've looked at one of your electric bills recently, not only there's an image there of a woman screaming, it's kind of an old-timey image, but I wanted to put that in there because how often, do you look at something like this and go, does anybody really know how to read this? This is driving me crazy. This is kind of just basically to drive the point home that, number one, what's wrong with this picture? So for starters, we've got them using some really cool green there in this bar chart, this bar graph, and we're not exactly sure. You really are going to have to go back, whoever's using this, and check. It is complicated, yes. Not only is it really complicated, but you've got numbers. If you see this, the way you're looking at the chart, you've got numbers on both sides of the chart. You've got them going up the left-hand side, and you've got them going up the right-hand side. And honestly, to right-click on that and go back in and tag that image, it can seem really, really tedious if you're thinking about going back and trying to provide alternative text to explain this. Yes, you want to be concise. We'll get to that in just a second. But just to kind of give you a real life example here, this is this is something that I took off of the internet. But again, you get one of these things and you're just going, wow. But consider also it's not just someone who's using a screen reader that you're going to have to think about, but like I said, you've got somebody maybe who's looking at this at a distance. You really want to try to convey what's the actual point here. What are you trying to say? Okay, the point here is change in usage and change in price, but I'm honestly dizzy just looking at it, and I don't even want to mess with it. Here's another example. This is just a little crazy here, but what I've done essentially is just kind of provided you with a little pie chart. And we're using, of course, some blue shading there, some blue and gray shading. And, basically just kind of talking about some sales percentages. This is just something I threw in there. But this is problematic for a few reasons. First, it's impossible to determine the reading order of the numbers. Why? Because you and I might look at things very differently. Where my eye first goes to this middle part here where it says sales, Your eye might go to the bottom here where the shading in purple or different type of blue, blurple, if you will. The third quarter where it says 48% there, right? So you can see how this might be a little bit problematic because you're not exactly sure where the person's eye is going to go first. It's impossible to predict that. You can't always predict the reading order, and a screen reader is not going to pick up on those floating numbers across this rendering. It's just not going to do it. So the more complicated you make something like this, just keep in mind that you'll need to go back in and make sure that it's correct when you're providing your alternative text there in terms of what you want them to read, what you want them to pick up on. It's just not intuitive, and that's part of the reason. And to show you a little bit of a Band-Aid fix when you're doing something like this, I'm going to share my screen really quick. Just to show you a very quick Band-Aid fix. This is not, this is not always recommended, but part of the other problem in here is that if you're trying to do this and you're keeping in mind screen readers, when you come over here and click on the outline, okay, you'd like this data to basically come in. You want this data to come in, so it's not always going to show up here. Is you've got this item here, and it comes up in the content placeholder. You've got your title, you've got your content placeholder. What's number 5? That's the sales, okay? But one way that you can also create is you can put a text box. You can also, if you want this to be picked up by your chart there, you can create a text box. Just make sure that it doesn't necessarily come in. Okay, and what you're doing is essentially move the order of it, okay? But if you do this, you're going to create that and then make it invisible by making the letters white. And that's one way of ensuring that it makes it in there. Anyway, it's a Band-Aid fix. It's not always 100%, but again, that's one way that you can try to make sure that it's picked up in the outline, okay? Why is this important? Because sometimes what you're doing if you're in a hurry is if you're doing something and you're going to provide an alternative version, a lot of times people will just pick up the information from the outline. Might be one way that you can get it. If there's certain content and it's getting really pesky on you, then creating adding in a text box there. Remember, you don't want to be doing this every single slide. So it's really recommended as just a very quick Band-Aid fix if there's something that outline is not picking up on and you've noticed it in there and you want to make sure it does get picked up. You can create that little invisible text box and then it should show up in the outline. Accessible tables, we really run into this issue quite a bit at the ADA Center, or if you are part of any type of grant writing project, there are tables upon tables that will drive you crazy. The thing to remember about tables is that screen readers only read aloud each cell, one by one, and they read them left to right, top to bottom. So keep in mind, tables will need to have some alternative text as well. In Word docs, they can have captions, so that makes it a little bit easier. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Essentially, you're going to go in and add alternative text to your table the same way you would an image. Essentially, if you're going to create the table, you would right-click on your table, and you're going to do Format Shape. And it's going to be all the way down here at the alt text. And again, just put in a brief description of what you're trying to convey. You can put in the description of the columns. That's always helpful. Your headers and your columns. But essentially, just try to be as straightforward as you can. Tables, the table is conveying X, Y, Z. Okay. Be good to, like I said, title gives them the option of, deciding whether or not they want to continue or they want to just skip it and go forward to something else. Merge cells. This might seem like a good idea, but it does create problems for screen readers, and it's essentially part of the difference into what's simple tables or complex tables. Again, you want to make sure that you're coming across with that right, left to right, top to bottom. Screen readers process the info linearly, so again, if you're adding a lot of merged cells in there, keep in mind that the screen reader is not going to pick up on that. Simple tables are just more accessible. The table contains just one header row and one header column, where a header column is going to specify the type of information. In addition, there's no merged cells, like I said, but essentially, let's see if we can identify those header rows. You're going to click on the Table Properties feature for this table. I'm going to click on it, Table Tools. But in here in the design features is where you're going to be able to, create something that's a little bit more your needs are. Identify your header rows and column order. So you're going to click on the table, and then you're going to click on the properties. They bring up those table tools, your properties. And up here on the left-hand corner, you've got header row. So if I turn that off, it's going to show you what I've highlighted. But essentially, I'm going to turn off, there's your first column, and there's your last column, okay? Here, basically what you can do is last column, okay? There's ways to play with that, but again, that's basically what you're doing to identify your header row. You want this to be your header row, you can highlight that and click it. There's a lot of different things you can do in here in the layout. It's always recommended to use one of these styles. You can go in and modify them, play with them. They're not the prettiest things, depending on what version of Microsoft PowerPoint you're using, but you can also create a table in Word and then insert it here too. That's something that can be very easy. Okay. Dual header is, making it a complex thing, is when you basically merge something like this. That's where it gets a little bit complicated. So if you're going to be doing something like that, just remember, go in and put those alternative tags in there. Make sure you add alternative text so that you're conveying whatever it is that information is that you want to convey. One of the other things too is we always want to recommend adding captions, of course, we recommended, but don't make your table into an image. We do recommend, if you're grouping items together, objects, shapes, things like that, that's one thing. But don't make your table into an image. This can get problematic. It doesn't always paste in well as an image. It may get distorted. It may cause some other issues with people who are using different types of augmentative software. It just doesn't, you just can't always predict how that's going to be read. So, that's just one thing. Adding captions are all tagged to a table or chart. You just need to click on that outer corner, and then it's going to bring up that issue. But essentially, that's how to do that. But it'll give you, in that design mode properties, an example of how to put in your headers and other information there to add the caption if you want to do that in Microsoft Word. Right, a word about Smart Art. Smart Art is not quite screen reader friendly. You still need to provide alternative text for it. I know a lot of people might be rolling their eyes saying, well, it should be something that's easy to read and pick up on. It's not necessarily, because again, you can't predict how screen readers, and there's a lot of different screen reader software that people are using nowadays. Sometimes people use a lot of free stuff that they're pulling off the internet, and it's just not necessarily, it's not something you can predict. So I'm going to do a quick demo to kind of share with you. So we've got our Smart Art here, and I'm just showing you. Right now, as you select it, right, you're just going to go in and click on it. It's showing you what order things are in, which is pretty good. However, it's not necessarily, it just depends. screen readers may or may not read this in the correct order, okay? Depending on how someone's navigating it, it's impossible to predict, but you can go in and tag that is you're going to do the same thing. You're going to select it, and then you just try to do the outer corner here. There we go. That very outer corner, and if you're using a different type of mouse like I am, that's why it's so hard for me sometimes to select this in the right way to show you guys. But you're going to click on Format Object, and again, it's going to bring out that format shape, and you're going to click down here to alternative text, okay? And there you've got your description of what you're trying to convey with the Smart Art. It's just very easy and it's simple. If it's something that you're doing really complicated, like for example, a hierarchy chart, I would still recommend using, whatever order the information that you're trying to provide in is, put that in there if you can. If you're going to be doing something really, really complicated, then it may be better to do a text box, an invisible one to the side there, like I showed you earlier. And then you type in your information. Again, this is a Band-Aid fix. And somebody might be screaming right now if they're listening to me and saying, well, this is not right. Again, it's just a very quick Band-Aid fix because you want that information to appear in the outline over here if you're going to just be taking the outline and using that and sharing that with someone in a different conversion of, whatever format. When is this important? A lot of times what we do, and this is just something that we do at the ADA Center, is that if you have to convert something to Braille, it's very difficult and probably tedious, if you've had to do this, to go through and either turn off all the images that you have in something in this presentation, right? And remember, by turning off the images, we can just go over here to our selection and visibility pane. You can turn off the text box, right? You can turn off the diagram, and there it's gone. You click on the little eye, and you turn it back on. Again, if you don't have a whole lot of time, this is going to help you work a little bit smarter, not harder. Then what you can do is you take the information from the outline. Well, that's what we generally do, is take that information from the outline and we give that to the Braillers so that we can have something made into Braille. This saves us a lot of time, but again, you really need to make sure that you're setting your stuff up correctly so that you can be able to do that. That's the key, is if you start off correctly and you're doing this right from the beginning, you're not going to have to go back in and do a lot of extra work after. But essentially that's what we do, is we take from the outline and we just provide it. We can either copy and paste from the outline into a text file, or you can save it as, or just do the outline and print a file, depending on what you're using. And then we send that to a Braille company that does the Braille version for us for an individual who needs that. Because any kind of image, if you've ever sent something to the Braillers, sometimes the images don't really get conveyed very well. So if you want to just send them straight text and skip the imagery, it's a lot easier to do that. We're on slide 29. Our color use. Again, this is the grayscale feature that we talked about last time. Really, it's somewhat difficult to stay away from those shades of red and green and yellows or oranges, really, in a lot of stuff. So what you really want to worry about mainly is when you are looking into, when you're looking at your templates and your other color schemes that you're using from the design view, is that your things are contrasting well. And essentially, you're just ensuring that those colorblind viewers can get conveyed the same information, instead of using colors, use textures if you're doing those graphs or charts, things like that. Use high contrast colors. You're going to hit the view. You've got the options down here under color, grayscale, black and white, and you're going to hit grayscale. And that's going to show you what your presentation looks like in grayscale. So do these items contrast pretty well? Yeah, they do. You don't see anything that's gone missing, and they still get the information conveyed. But as you're running through your presentation and looking at some of this stuff, okay, so Here we've got an example of something it's kind of small from our view, so we're not exactly sure that this image is coming in very well. Maybe have to do a little bit work on that, so that's something to come back to. But essentially, you're just running through your presentation to make sure that the contrast is, that things are dark enough and that the background is light enough so that it can be seen in terms of these differences. And the same goes, for your templates. I mean, you're able to see it here, as I mentioned last time. Someone's done a pretty good job of making sure that this template comes through and contrasts fairly well. You're just going to click on that back view. Again, hit View, not Review, and take you to that menu. Converting your presentation to other formats. This is also where a lot of these, things can come into play, especially if you're converting something to a PDF, a portable document format. But remaining flexible is always a win-win. There's no one way to do everything. Not everybody uses the same software. It's, like I said before, it's always unpredictable. And you may have people asking you who are not using software necessarily, but they want something in a different format because they want to print it out, and they'll have it there for viewing while they're looking, while you're going through your presentation. So again, it's not always straightforward. Do not rely just on the accessibility feature when you're converting to alternate formats. So always remember to test your documents. If you have someone that among your staff who is a user of software, it's great to, it's great to ask them to test run one of your documents, something like that, if you can. We don't want anybody to go put someone on the spot, though, necessarily. I like to do that with Diego, who's my coworker and cohort here at the ADA Center. A lot of times we run things by him all the time because we know he uses software. But if you don't have that, then just, running through your stuff and making sure that things convey, on your own can be really, really helpful. For the more complicated, images and things that you have, the more attention you need to pay to it when you're, about to do that and converting it. How do you use the accessibility checker? This is your other best friend. This is much the same in MS Word. The function is the same, but you basically use the File in menu, and I'm going to do that here. I'm going to share my screen. You're going to go down to Use. It's already popped up there. And it's going to ask it to inspect the document, check accessibility, or check compatibility. That's a little bit, more helpful if you're using different versions of PowerPoint, which we do on our staff because my version is way off than some of our other staff here. Some people are a little bit luckier than I am, but essentially that's what you do. But you can basically, you're going to click on that Prepare for Sharing, check for issues, and that'll take you through the accessibility checker. Let's run through it clear for links. So it's already giving you some warnings, and we're going to get to that stuff in just a second. We have all kinds of things, that you can take a look at. To PDF is a good way to provide those accessible formats. Your tables, your images, and hot links, which is those bright blue links, don't always translate. So to do that, you want to check your conversions always when you do that to make sure that they do translate. Creating a link, it's always better to include the entire web link. However, it's not as pretty, so you can hot link your text. As long as you're embedding them correctly, they should translate when you can make the other conversions. To do that, you're going to highlight your text and right-click on it. My biggest recommendation is always getting a second pair of eyes to look at your presentation to help you, because sometimes if you've been in it or if you've been at it for many days working on something, it's a lot easier to step away briefly and let someone else look at it to see what you might be missing. Create a hyperlink box here. And I'm going to just show you. If you hit enter, it may or may not automatically hyperlink for you. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and undo that enter. Say you want a hyperlink here. You're going to highlight this text. You're going to right-click. You're going to select hyperlink feature right down here. that's going to bring up the Insert Hyperlink menu. And this might confuse you here, just that try not to change the settings, because you can also create a hyperlink to something else in your document. That might be important. For example, if you are creating some type of manual table of contents and you want it to be picked up. If you're doing that, give me a call. We're not going to go over that right now. I'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into Microsoft Word in the next one. But if you're doing that and you're having issues, call me. I can try to walk you through it. But essentially, what you're going to do is existing file or web page. Down here in the address, that's where you're going to type in the web address. And you click OK. And now it's hyperlinked in blue. A lot of times we take it for granted. You hit the Enter key and it should link it automatically, but it doesn't always happen. And so that's an easy way to make sure that it's embedded correctly, and when you convert it to a PowerPoint or a Word doc, it should show through correctly. It should give them, when they scroll over with their mouse, it may not show up here, but basically what it is you'll scroll over it with a mouse, and it'll give you the option to control and click and take you to that link. Tips for when you're using Adobe Acrobat: ensure the Create bookmarks, add links, and enable accessibility and reflow with tagged Adobe PDF options are all enabled. Then click OK. And you do that just by going to your settings if you have the Adobe Acrobat there. And I don't have it on this machine. I do apologize. I had to switch machines at the last second. So again, if you need some help with that, feel free to call me. I can walk you through. But again, just go into your Adobe Acrobat and click on those settings, and it'll allow you to basically make those selections. In your Acrobat, a lot of you might have the most up-to-date version of Acrobat. If you don't, it should pop up that feature, but if you don't, then basically you go to View in the Tools menu and you can select it from there. You can do a full check or a quick check. There's also other tools in there, and I encourage you to just take a few minutes. If you're not familiar with it, take a few minutes and just go in and look at those settings in there, because they can be very helpful.
Okay, Marissa, this is Anne Marie, and I know we're running. We're at 3 o'clock. So I'm wondering, when we do our next session, which is going to be in October, I believe it's the 22nd at 2 o'clock again.
Yes.
If we could just spend a few minutes going over the slides about the tables and really maybe walking through one.
Yes.
If you create a simple table in PowerPoint, labeling the columns and then the rows, and then going into alt text and labeling it, that is something that I would like to see. And maybe we can do that before we get into tables and charts and Word. I don't know if that would help everyone else, but it sure would help me. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, and it's essentially almost the same, so we can certainly do that.
Okay.
And I will make a note here so that we're going to focus on that pretty hard next time around.
Okay, good, because I know because in our office we do create a lot of Word documents that have charts and graphs, and then we have to, possibly convert those to PDF or not. And I think it would just be helpful if we did that, if we spent time on that.
Most definitely. This is my goodies. This is we call it my goodie box. And I have more to add, but I'm going to add those in for the next presentation that are a little bit more related to Word. But this is a lot of stuff that I've picked up along the way. Some of it you may already be familiar with it. The WebAIM tutorial, if you haven't checked it out, is excellent. It's a little simplified, but it is excellent. Penn State's Charts and Accessibility page talks about color, things like that. That's pretty darn good. Accessible data tables, they do have a really pretty decent explanation of doing things, and they have some great recommendations in there. I couldn't incorporate all of it in here, but this is essentially who I steal from, all these different resources. You've probably already done some tutorials with regard to PowerPoint, but if you haven't checked out the one from Michigan State, it's really cool. I encourage you to check that out too. 508.gov's testing tools, you probably may already be familiar with, but you can test out your documents and your web pages here, and you could do it for free. It's not like they're going to charge, so that's why I like to throw that in there. Yeah, it's a great tool. It is a really great tool. We use it a lot. And this is our affiliates, the University of Arkansas. This is one of our affiliates in Arkansas. They have a whole website that they've dedicated to some of these accessibility features, some of these tips. They've done a lot of stuff because they do quite a bit of online learning, and they've got that in there, and they have a bunch of resources embedded within that site too, if you want to check those out. A little bit more about color contrast, because I know we've just got an hour. We don't have a whole lot of time to go into some of these as deeply as we would like. But those last two on color contrast, they're some pretty good resources to tap into if you want to know more about that or understand a little bit more. I may not have been the best at explaining those. So thank you, everyone. I want to apologize for the phone going off, even though I got away to a different room. Apparently that happened again, so I'm not sure what's going on there. I do apologize for that interruption.
You're just very valuable. You cannot escape, no matter what room you go to.
I think somebody told somebody where I was going to be. I don't know. Yeah. Didn't count on that happening.
Well, there's a lot of thank yous coming in from everybody, and excellent information again. And I want to say on behalf of all of Train PD again, thank you so much, Marissa, for taking the time on Monday and today. And we just so appreciate it, and we just appreciate you coming at this from a very practical perspective, because that's what we deal with.
Thank you. I thank you guys, and thanks for your patience. Again, I know this isn't always, a lot of screen sharing in there, so this is not always so easy to convey on screen, but if you do have something that you want to, that you're having trouble with, feel free to call me. Anne-Marie's got our information there. And, we're happy to have you call us, and I'm happy to walk through something with you. If I don't know the answer, then I'm happy to try to research it and find out for you, okay?
And I put the number in there again, and you can
Great.
Always just email me. So thank you so much, everybody. And Marissa, thank you so much. And I'll keep the door open here for a few minutes if there's any questions. And if not, thanks so much, everybody. And Marissa, thank you from behalf of Train PD very much.
Thank you.